Hey, good morning. So yesterday I posted a post on unity of life, which talks a little bit about what it's like, or what the difference is between living what we believe or being able to live what we believe, and believing one thing and finding that we can't seem to bring it into our actual lives, right? So this morning, I was journaling and reflecting a little bit more about this whole integration and unity of life thing. And this is an impromptu decision to do a little sharing on one problem I think a lot of people have without really being aware. One reason why we struggle to live what we believe is a philosophical problem. Okay, what do I mean by that? So we often hear the terms subjective and objective, and we think we know what those words mean, right? But here's one thing we often kind of like assume when we hear each of these words, right? When we hear the word objective, we usually immediately think, okay, something that's objective is better, is more true, right? We always put the words objective and truth together, right? So we often think objectivity and truth go together, and subjectivity doesn't go together with truth, because we often say, oh, that's just your subjective opinion, that's just coming from you, that's not necessarily the objective truth. Now here's a problem when we think like that, because we are actually conflating. Okay, I'm going to apologize in advance for using slightly bigger words today, because this is a little bit of philosophy, and it's hard to talk about philosophy without using some of these terms. But I will do my best to explain terms that I think may not be commonly understood. And if you have any question about any terms, feel free to put it in the comments, whether you're watching this live or afterwards as a replay. Feel free to ask me, okay, about the terms that I use that you may not be familiar with. So I was saying that we conflate, meanings conflating means, two things that are actually separate. We kind of like collapse them into one. We confuse them. They're no longer distinct. So we conflate two ways in which we use the word objective. For example, let's start with objective, okay? So one assumption, which I've already mentioned earlier, is that we think that objectivity correlates with truth. So there's objective has an epistemic meaning again. So epistemic means of knowledge. Okay, so there's a way when we talk about objective, we think it's more true. So there's this truth element. But objective also means of an object versus a subject. So what do I mean? This is my journal, right? It is not me. It is not me. So I'm a subject. I'm the subject. This is an object. So when it is a description about something that's outside of me, that's not me, that's an objective description, right? Because it is about the object. So there's this element of experience, in the sense that something that is not me, that is outside of me, is objective. So the further away from me it is, in a sense, the more outside of me, the more external it is, the more objective. It's further away from me as a subject, right? So that's one meaning to the word object. Now, when we put together, when we conflate these two meanings, right, it means that we assume that every time a statement is made or something, that can be described that is away from our reality, that the further away it is from my subjective reality, my personal reality, that it has to be necessarily more true, right? So we confuse what is objective in terms of not of the subject with what is more true. So what happens then? We tend to be suspicious of anything that's subjective, meaning that's of the subject. Because again, the two dimensions of the meaning of the word subjective, one would be we think it is less true, It's that there's a truth element. But another way of talking about subject means it's just from the perspective of the person who is the subject, right? A human person is never an object, where we also talk about that as human person is a subject. And I cannot get out of my reality. I can never reach a point of view that is completely outside of me. When we try to do that, hey Linda, I hope you enjoy this little impromptu philosophy mini lecture. When we think we can escape our subjective perspective and arrive at something that is true completely outside of us, we will run into a lot of issues, because that's often when manipulation and abuse can happen, when we think that there is knowledge that can happen totally apart from the human subject. Now, the thing about Christian discipleship, I think we often veer between these two extremes. All right. I remember when I went through a very, very, very good training for catechist coordinators, more than a decade back. And the pedagogy that we were taught was about how, it's not about the human subject, in the sense that, God is so far beyond us. We cannot just remain in our little selves, right? So to bring someone to encounter God, we need to bring them out of themselves, or beyond themselves, beyond their subjective experience. Now, there's truth in that, but it's not the whole picture, right? Because God is both transcendent, He's more other than any other. He's beyond our comprehension, right? So far beyond. He's not even a being. He is being itself, to be itself. But God is also immanent, right? This is theological language. He's also really, really near. As St. Augustine says, He's nearer than I am to myself, right? God, who is transcendent, the creator of the whole universe, beyond anything we can imagine, chooses also to become bread and wine, right? I mean, in my tradition, Catholic tradition, to become food and drink. You can't get more concrete, and closer than that, so immanent, right? Not only that, God, who is pure being, or to be itself, chose to take the form of a human subject, of Jesus Christ. Why? Okay, I want to talk about this in a relational term, because we can only be in relationship with another subject. A subject can only be in relationship with another subject, right? A human subject, cannot be in relationship with an object, with a concept. We cannot be in relationship with an understanding, no matter how thought-provoking and enlightening, that understanding might be. It's not a relationship. And discipleship is ultimately about relationship. So we cannot remove the subject from discipleship. We cannot remove the particular from discipleship. All right. There is a Canadian Jesuit philosopher and theologian called Bennett Lonergan. He's one of the greatest philosophical and theological minds of the Catholic Church in the 20th century. His trajectory of thought, comes from Augustine and Aquinas, and he tried to bring that into, say that, the modern mind, right? So he studies the cognition, the nature of cognition and understanding, and he brings that into an explanation of theology. And I really, really love this phrase from Bennett Lonergan. He says that genuine epistemic objectivity, so genuine objectivity in terms of truth, is the fruit of authentic subjectivity. Okay, let me repeat that again. Genuine epistemic objectivity is the fruit of authentic subjectivity. What he means is, without an authentic exercise of my subjectivity, of living and using my very specific perspective to be in relationship with the world, with God, whatever it is, whether it's outside of me, I cannot arrive at truth. So when we think, or when we understand that subjectivity is important, our subjectivity is important, maybe we can start to feel less guilty about paying attention to ourselves. Okay, so I'm addressing people for whom, you're already on, you want to be a disciple, right? You want to love God more. You want to be more selfless and serve our neighbor. And for a lot of us, people who really want to be a disciple and be an apostle, it's almost like we don't allow ourselves to look at ourselves, other than to maybe beat ourselves up about how sinful we are and how far away we still are from holiness, right? You see, but that kind of defeating behavior, defeating because it's just going to make us frustrated and discouraged, it comes from thinking that we can only choose either objective or subjective, right? Why? When I only focus on the needs outside of me, objective, right, of the object, not mine, well, I will be overwhelmed. I'll be distracted because there's so many needs all around me. I get so many requests, right, to serve here, to help there. Which one do I say yes to? If the only criteria that I use for discernment has to be outside of me, I can't even discern. I mean, why? Because discernment has to be a function of me, my mind, right, my heart, my relationship with God. I can't escape my subjectivity, okay? We cannot escape our subjectivity. So when we think that we can escape our subjectivity and we try to use what we think is objective standards out there telling us what we need to do or what we should do, actually it is what Bennett Lonergan would say, it would be a flight from insight, a flight from insight. It's actually irresponsible because God created us to use our mind, our heart, our cognition, right? To be faithful to the structures of the mind and consciousness that He has given us. Our subjectivity is to be celebrated, right? There can be a faithful, authentic use of our subjectivity in order to arrive at objective, epistemic objectivity, at what is true. So if I only look at the needs outside of myself, I will get stuck, I'll get frustrated. If I look at standards of discipleship, standards of holiness, also all outside of myself, right? Looking at maybe people that I admire, maybe looking at the canonized saints, all that can be edifying, but only to a point. Why? Because they are not me. God did not create me the way He created, St. Joan of Arc, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Catherine of Siena. They are all specific, discrete individuals. They are human subjects who were in relationship with Christ. I am my own human subject. And I am meant to be in a particular relationship with Christ that is unlike any other person's relationship with Christ. The way for me to come at truth has to take into consideration both information that is outside of me, knowledge and wisdom that has been passed down through tradition and scripture and outside of me, but it also must take into consideration where I am, who I am, the design that God has given me. It has to be the interplay of these two for me to find my distinct path into a deeper relationship with Christ, which is discipleship. It is also what I need in order to find my distinct path into my mission. Right? So subjectivity is very important. Without understanding our unique subjectivity, we will always find that we cannot bring together all the truths that we are studying, right? About scripture, about theology, about the nature of God, about sacrament saints. I mean, all that, because they are outside of me. They are not me. And that's a big reason why so many of us live fragmented lives. We find that the distance between knowing something in our heads and experiencing it in our bodies and in our hearts, and then being able to actually live according to what we understand, there are two different things. So I think in 2012 was the first time a group which I was part of, went to Colorado Springs, and we were trained in the called and gifted charism discernment program. But what really struck us when we were there was not even about charism discernment, because Sherry Weddle, she talked to us about the thresholds of discipleship. So that was the first time we were introduced to the thresholds of discipleship. It was actually before her book came out, just a couple of months before her book got published. All right, her book, The Forming Intentional Disciples, okay, that talks about the different thresholds of discipleship. We were really fired up. I mean, the group that, the whole group that went, the small group that went, we were very fired up because we realized that, it makes sense. What's missing is discipleship. It's not just it's not just understanding, right? What's missing is that people are not in relationship with Christ, that relationship is not deepening, and so we don't see the fruits of discipleship. So we came back to Singapore, back to our parish, and we were so excited about trying to implement an evangelization process that would make disciples. But a few years after of trying to put that into action, and making some progress, but not a lot, we slowly, each of us, at different points in time, began to understand why we were struggling. Because while the idea of discipleship was really powerful, and understanding, being given a framework of what discipleship can look like, felt very helpful. It helped us to understand kind of like the problem that the church faced. But that's still just a concept. That's just understanding. The real question was, what does it mean for me? Each one of us, each subject, right? What does it mean for me to be on this journey? What does it mean for me to actually walk that path? It's not so clean cut. It's not so simple. It's not just a framework, right? In order for each person to walk the path of discipleship, it becomes very subjective. That's very important. Why? Because everyone is different. Everyone has a different history. Everyone has a different perspective. Everyone has different experiences of trauma, right? Everyone has a different temperament, different motivational design. God meets us in our particularity, in our very specific subjectivity. And that's what's so powerful about being in relationship with God. Think about any intimate relationship you have, whether it's a good friend, a spouse, who's the closest human person you have in this world. When you are relating to this person, do you feel like you're relating to a framework, to a concept, no matter how wonderful and perfect a concept may seem? No, right? You are in relationship with a person, and that relationship takes time. It changes over time. It meets you where you are. You have to meet that person where they are. I guess in the case of God, God is always, He's eternal, He's constant, but because He chooses to be in relationship with us, it would feel like on our end, that even our experience of God continues to change. God Himself doesn't change, but we can only mediate this relationship through our human subjectivity and experience. So this is a very important element that I think is missing in a lot of our interior journeys and in a lot of our efforts to evangelize and disciple people. Sometimes we are so afraid of subjectivity because we think subjective means immediately subjectivism, that anything goes. Subjective, emphasis on subjective. The subjective means relativism. Again, that anything goes. And that we want to shy away from what is particular and individual. We only want to emphasize what is communal, what is, the entirety, the whole church. We forget that the church is made up of individual subjects. That everything that Christ gave was for each individual human person. How can we honor that individuality and subjectivity without fear that, that honoring the dignity and the uniqueness of a human being does not naturally equate or lead us to selfishness. Because I think that's a very fear-based kind of approach to faith. Like, we are afraid to pay attention to our individuality, to our needs, because that would be, that would look bad on us. That's not what Christ asked us to do. Actually, it is, right? When Christ summed up the commandments to love the Lord our God with all our heart, all our mind, all our strength, all our soul, all of us, right? And then to love our neighbor as ourselves. We always seem to just drop off that last part, we just assume, as ourselves. What does that even mean? We cannot escape our uniqueness, both the gift and the shadows, the light and the shadows. We cannot escape the way our past experiences, our hurts and our wounds distort the way we enter any relationship, including our relationship with God. To think that we can escape that subjectivity and to only try and focus on some activity that we can do and think that we can then be safe and grow in relationship with God by just paying attention on what we can do, as if that has nothing to do with where we are, our current needs, our current season, and the particular ways that God made us to feel alive, that would always lead us to fragmentation. And what happens then? Some of us, we give up. We remain separated. We keep there's a part of our lives where we do what we can do to, do the churchy things or the Christian things. We go and learn more about the faith. We even learn more about healing sometimes. But it doesn't take place in us. It doesn't take place in us. Then how can we witness? There is no witness of life, even if we learn to proclaim. So where I am right now in 2022 in Singapore, my faith community here, my local church has been for the last several years talking the language of evangelization and mission. That wasn't the case 10 years ago yet, right? 10, 11 years ago. Even when I was working full-time in a parish, the young people thought I was weird for speaking the name of Jesus because we don't say the name, right? I had an altar server who actually asked me, why are you always talking about Jesus? Why, And, but now it seems, now it's kind of like a given thing where I am, right? In my local church, we talk about evangelization. We talk about the importance of relationship with Christ, but I think a lot of it is at the level of understanding. And a lot of us who hear this a lot, after a while can get discouraged because we don't see the transformation in our own lives. We don't see the transformation in our communities. We don't see the transformation in the church. Why? I think not the only reason perhaps, but a big part of it is we have not learned how to merge the objective with the subjective in the way that Bennett Lonergan says. Right, that genuine truth, objective truth, genuine epistemic objectivity is the fruit of authentic subjectivity, and there is no one size fit all. Okay, I really believe in that so much. At the level of concepts, sure, you can have certain universal principles, but the moment you want to bring it into a person's heart, into your own heart, it can no longer just be a universal principle. It has to take on flesh, like God took on flesh as one particular human being. He couldn't become every human being in a place and time, right? And he became human. When he took on flesh, he was just one human being in that particularity. So I think we need to find a way to understand how to hold both what is objective in terms of truth, right? And what is subjective in terms of me, the human subject, in relationship with God, how we can hold those two things together. So that's my little spiel about philosophy. I mean, a bit of objectivity and subjectivity. And I think I'll stop here for this because I don't even know if it landed. So if if you guys don't understand anything, and whether you're watching this on replay, or even those of you who are popping in and out here on the live, I mean, please, leave a comment or PM me or DM me if there's anything you wish to ask. If there are enough, if there are questions, I will try and answer that in the next video maybe. Okay, I really am quite excited about starting this kind of conversation, starting to help people maybe think about things a little differently from what we're used to, because I think I feel really that philosophy and psychology has so much to contribute alongside theology and spirituality to form the total human person and to inform our journey to God. So thank you guys who are here, and please share this with friends that you think are maybe a little philosophically inclined who may find this interesting. And till the next time. Okay, bye guys.